Hi everybody, my name is Elizabeth and I'm a librarian here at the LSC Tomball Community Library. Welcome back to Screenshots, which is the series where I recommend to you great movies that you can watch for free with your library card. Now, when we think of art, we tend to think of the finished product, the book, movie, video game, or album that we're interacting with. But a lot goes into the production of a piece of art before it finds its way to you. You need time, resources, training, and connections to make something and then see it widely distributed. And this is even more so the case when it comes to film. The collaborative nature of film means that the need for that time, training, resources, and connections is even higher than it is for something that you could theoretically throw together in your bedroom, like an album or even a self-published novel. And this is why we often tend to find movies that are made by people with the same backgrounds and experiences, and why it's often harder to find films made by people from marginalized communities than it is to find things like books, music, or poetry. This is the case for basically every marginalized community when it comes to the film industry, including women. Women have made great strides in basically every area, but award seasons still come and go without female writers, directors, cinematographers, and editors getting their due. But this doesn't mean that women aren't making great films and haven't always been making great films. Which is why today, in celebration of Women's History Month, I am going to tell you about 4 great films from female filmmakers that you can watch for free through the Harris County Public Library. So, let's get started. When we think of the term filmmaker, we typically think of directors. And although directors have a huge impact on the finished product of a film, filmmaking is hugely collaborative and requires a vast number of people in many different roles to get a movie onto the screen. And this is why, even though there are plenty of fantastic female directors out there, and we will be talking about them later in this video, I wanted to start by talking about a female screenwriter, Greta Gerwig. Gerwig has played a number of roles in the film industry during her career, including as an actor in films like Isle of Dogs and Jackie, and as a director of recent critical darlings like Lady Bird and Little Women. But I specifically want to focus today on a movie that she wrote, Frances Ha, the 2012 film from director Noah Baumbach. Frances Ha follows the titular character of Frances, who is also played by Gerwig, an aspiring dancer who finds herself in the throes of a quarter-life crisis when her best friend moves out of their shared apartment to move in with her boyfriend. If you've watched other films by Baumbach, like The Squid and the Whale or Marriage Story, then you might think that this is going to be another movie about mediocre rich people and their petty squabbles with each other. And while that might be true to a certain extent, there's an affection and tenderness to this film that would not have been there without Gerwig's writing. Frances may be immature, but that immaturity comes from a place of genuine love for her friends and a desire to succeed in her chosen field. And while the writing might still be unflinching in how it portrays Frances's neuroses, the whole film is shot in this gorgeous black and white that recalls the French New Wave and elevates Frances's story to something more universal. There are bucket loads of movies that do for male protagonists what Frances Ha does for Frances, but Gerwig does us the service of showing that yes, women can have existential crises too. You can check out Frances Ha on DVD from the Harris County Public Library. Being a woman can be scary. Just take a look at the keychains of your female friends and family members to see their variety of self-defense implements if you don't believe me. The fear and insecurity of being a woman has been a fruitful topic for horror films for decades. But many of the films exploring this topic, like Rosemary's Baby or Carrie, have been directed by men. Now, men are more than capable of telling compelling stories about women. But having female filmmakers make movies about the female experience presents a unique opportunity. And there's no denying that Jennifer Kent's 2014 film, The Babadook, is unique. Amelia is a young widow who finds herself in the position of having to raise her son Sam alone following the sudden death of her husband. After Sam claims that their home is being plagued by a monster, Amelia finds a mysterious picture book called Mr. Babadook that tells the story of a creepy monster who torments anyone who learns of his existence. This kicks off a series of mysterious happenings around their home, which Sam attributes to the Babadook, eventually leading Amelia to wonder if maybe he's right. The Babadook is part of a lineage of horror films where the real horror comes not from some external supernatural force or a crazed murderer, but from the more grounded horror of the genuine experiences of its characters. Don't get me wrong here, the Babadook is scary, but the real scares in this movie come from the experience of grief and the acknowledgement that we can never truly understand anyone, even the people who we love the most. Like later prestige-y horror films like Ari Aster's Hereditary, The Babadook succeeds so incredibly that it reached across the divide that typically keeps the art house from major cinemas, and was one of the most unlikely crowd pleasers of 2014. For a nuanced, if not always pleasant, look at the complex experiences of motherhood, The Babadook is sure to please. You can check out The Babadook on DVD from the Harris County Public Library. The female perspective and horror go together like peanut butter and jelly. After all, there is probably no horror trope as iconic as the final girl, the young woman who is most likely to survive to the end of any given horror film. The final girl is typically trying to fend off the advances of a crazed serial killer or a monster. But what if the final girl and the monster were actually one and the same? This is just part of the central premise behind Anna Lily Amirpour's 2014 film, A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. Set in a fictional Iranian city, A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night follows the story of Arash, an overworked young man who finds himself struggling to survive in the criminal underbelly of Bad City. He finds an unlikely ally in a mysterious young woman he finds roaming the streets at night. Like Arash, the young woman, who is never named, also seems to be a misunderstood loner, but there is one sharp distinction between them. This young woman is a vampire. Amirpour described A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night as the first Iranian vampire western, and she's not wrong. The high contrast black and white the film is shot in recalls old school monster movies, while the girl's no-holds-barred quest for justice against the cruel men of Bad City recalls spaghetti westerns. But even with all of these influences, A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night is more than the sum of its parts, and is something completely unique. Taking its title from a horror film and true crime cliché, this film begs the question of what if the people who we see as being the most vulnerable were actually dangerous in their own right. If you found yourself intrigued by the feminist vigilante justice of A Promising Young Woman, or other moody vampire flicks like Only Lovers Left Alive, A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night is truly a singular viewing experience. You can watch A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night on Kanopy. For better or worse, when many people think of women in movies, they tend to think of romantic comedies, which are often maligned as being chick flicks. Even I once wrote off this entire genre of film as being trite and predictable, but both film critics and myself are starting to come around to the potential of the romantic comedy. And a perfect example of what this genre can do when handled well is Gurinder Chadha's 2004 film Bride and Prejudice. You might recognize Chada as being the director behind the classic teen film Bend It Like Beckham, and she brings the same energy and excitement from that film into Bride and Prejudice. As you might expect from the title, Bride and Prejudice is an adaptation of Jane Austen's classic novel Pride and Prejudice, but updated to a modern, or at least early 2000s, context. Often, in my opinion, Pride and Prejudice adaptations struggle to find any real conflict between Elizabeth and Darcy, which is the central driving force of the plot. But Bride and Prejudice accomplishes this in an interesting way by moving the setting of the film from Regency England to 21st century India. This film's Darcy arrives to India from LA to attend the wedding of a friend of a friend. At this wedding, he is immediately attracted to Lalita Bakshi, this film's equivalent of Elizabeth Bennet. But his ignorance to her culture and customs immediately turns her off. The structure of this film is basically identical to its source material, but the updated context and setting makes it feel totally fresh. Additionally, in accordance with Bollywood tradition, Bride and Prejudice is a musical, which adds an additional dimension to making this feel totally different from the Austen novel, even if they are telling essentially the same story. For even the most jaded and cynical of film lovers, it's hard not to enjoy this movie. The joy in this film is absolutely infectious, and the stakes feel raised from the original by having it deal not just with gender issues, but also with cultural tensions. The last three films we've talked about have really run the gamut from being melancholy all the way to being genuinely terrifying, but Bride and Prejudice is a great example of the fact that joy is a central part of being a woman, and it can make for really good movies. You can check out Bride and Prejudice on DVD from the Harris County Public Library. Thank you for watching this episode of Screenshots. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter so that you never miss a future episode of Screenshots or any of our other great online programs. Obviously, this is just a slice of the incredible impacts that women have made in the history of film, but I hope you'll give these a shot and let me know if there's any absolutely essential entries that I missed. Thank you again for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful Women's History Month. Bye.